Have you ever believed that a single hug between a man and a creature the world calls a monster could bring you to tears? In the misty forests of Colorado, an old clockmaker named Jonah Mercer, living alone after the tragic loss of his wife, made a choice that changed everything. He dove into an icy river to save two fragile, fur-covered beings fighting for life. They weren't animals, they weren't human, and they were not alone. The truth is, Bigfoot isn't the beast we feared. They love, they mourn, they remember. While mankind set traps to harm them, one family of giants chose instead to forgive, in the most heartbreaking way imaginable. I've spent months researching Jonah's story, tracing it back to journal entries, forest patrol records, and the mysterious wood carving that made an old man cry, because it captured the face of his late wife, a face no one else in the world knew. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how two baby Bigfoots, a forgotten forest, and one small act of kindness sparked a connection between two worlds and gave hope to those who had lost everything. But now, I'd love to know, where are you watching this from? What's your name, dear listener? Could this story reach someone who's always believed in things unseen? If this story touched something in you, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and help us build a community that believes not just in Bigfoot, but in compassion, wonder, and the quiet magic of the woods. With all my heart, thank you for being here. This is only the beginning. The first thing Jonah Mercer noticed was the silence. It wasn't the kind of quiet that soothed. This was the kind that made your stomach sink before your mind could catch up. A silence too whole, too perfect. No chirps, no wind, no creak of branch or rustle of underbrush. Just the ticking of his clocks. They were still running, each one in its own rhythm, some fast, some slow, but all alive. The ticking filled the cabin like the breath of an old house. It should have been comforting. But today, it felt wrong. Jonah sat on the edge of his bed in his thermals, hands on his knees, listening hard. The old floor beneath his boots didn't protest the way it usually did. Even the pine wood felt like it was holding its breath. Through the single-pane window, the world outside was mist and pale light. Late spring, the kind that still carried winter's breath in its lungs. He leaned forward, squinting. The trees were still, not a twitch, not even a squirrel. He stood, pulled on his flannel shirt, the faded red one with the left cuff nearly worn through, then layered on his denim jacket. No need for coffee. His gut was already humming. Something was off. Jonah opened the cabin door. The hinges let out a sigh. A breath of cold, damp air slipped past him, brushing against the warmth of the fire still smoldering behind him. The porch steps groaned under his weight as he stepped down. And still, no birds. The path behind his cabin was well worn. A gentle slope into the dense patchwork of pines, spruce, and fir that made up the Glenwood Reach. The place his wife used to call the Green Room. He went there often since she passed. Walking helped quiet the grief, helped keep the rhythm of time when everything else had gone still. He took that path now, hands in his pockets, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The trees loomed tall and unmoving. Normally, he'd hear the creek by now, but even the water was quiet. No, not quiet. He stopped. There was a sound, faint, tattered, like cloth tearing in slow motion. A whimper, maybe. Then a pause. Then again, a tiny, broken cry that didn't belong to any bird he knew. It came from the left, deeper into the thicket where the creek carved around a fallen cedar. He turned off the trail. Branches brushed his jacket, damp and cool. His breath fogged the air in front of him. Each step sank into moss and leaf rot. As he got closer, the air changed. That tang of melting snow and granite hit his nose. The creek, rushing louder now, and beneath it, clearer, the crying. Jonah broke through the brush and stopped at the edge of the bank. The water was high from the thaw, biting cold and fast as it slithered over smooth stone. In the middle of the current, caught between two rocks, was a shape. Small, covered in what looked like dark brown fur. The thing bobbed, limbs flailing weakly. The face turned toward him. Wet, matted, strange. It wasn't a cub. The eyes were too forward, the nose too flat, half wild, half human. The sound it made wasn't an animal's cry. It sounded like fear. Jonah didn't think. His boots hit the water with a splash that burned through his jeans like needles. The current grabbed him instantly, yanking at his legs, nearly spinning him sideways. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, arms out, reaching. The creature thrashed, then fixed its eyes on him. It reached too, a tiny hand, long fingers, grasping not wildly, but deliberately. It clutched the front of his jacket, curled its fingers around the fabric, and held on like it knew he was its only chance. He hoisted it up against his chest, one arm wrapped tight around its middle. Its small body shivered hard, bones light, hair soaked, its head tucked under his chin, and it let out a sound, like a sigh that didn't belong in this world. Then something shifted behind him, a splash, not his, not from the thing in his arms. He turned, heart jolting. A second hand broke the surface of the creek, smaller, thinner, clawing up between two rocks. Pale fur, almost gray. It reached up once, then slipped under again. Jonah didn't hesitate. He shoved the first one higher up on his shoulder and waded deeper, water now to his chest. The current bucked and shoved, icy and violent. His boots scraped slick stones, nearly lost footing. But he kept going. His hand plunged beneath the surface, sweeping blind. Nothing. Then, fur. A tiny arm. He closed his grip and pulled. The second creature came up sputtering, this one even smaller, barely moving. Jonah groaned as he turned, fighting the water, struggling to keep his footing. His muscles burned. He slipped once, caught himself on a boulder, and then he felt it, a tug, not from the river, from behind him, from the first one. It had slid down from his shoulder and was now clinging to his back. Not out of fear, but helping him stay upright. One arm hooked around his neck, the other braced against his back, holding him steady, like it understood. He made it to the bank gasping, knees giving out as he collapsed to his side. Both creatures tumbled with him onto the cold stones, coughing, shaking. The smaller one whimpered, its chest heaving. The bigger one leaned into Jonah's ribs, its tiny fingers curled in his shirt. He lay there, blinking at the gray sky above the treetops, soaked to the skin, lungs burning. His heart was hammering so loud he didn't hear it at first. A sound in the forest. A shift, like weight settling on old ground. A low creak of wood. No wind. Just something moving. Jonah turned his head slowly toward the trees. Nothing. But the trees seemed off, like the pattern had changed. Branches held too still. A presence just beyond the veil of green. He gathered the creatures into his arms. They didn't resist. Their bodies were warm now, pressed tight to his chest. One tucked its head beneath his chin again. The other buried its face into his coat. It struck him with a sudden ache. This was the first time anyone had needed him in years. Not since Evelyn. He sat up, still breathing heavy, the weight of both creatures wrapped in his arms. His heart was still racing, but not from fear. The wind picked up then, just a little, enough to send the scent of wet pine and earth into his nose, enough to shake a few leaves. But it wasn't the wind that made the ground tremble. It started low, a sound that didn't belong in any bestiary or hunter's manual. A guttural rumble, far off but so deep it moved through the soil. Not a growl, not thunder. Jonah froze. The smaller one clung tighter. The taller trees in the distance swayed once, like something massive had passed behind them. He didn't know what it was, but it had felt him, felt them. He stood slowly, both creatures cradled tight in his arms. The cold had settled into his bones. His boots were heavy, his coat dripping. But he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't leave them here. Not now. Not after what he'd felt in that water. Not after the way they'd clung to him like he was more than a man. He turned toward the trail. The silence of the forest didn't lift. No birds returned, no distant woodpecker or chipmunk. Just the ticking, not of his clocks, of something older, something wilder, watching. Jonah tightened his grip and walked. And behind him, far off, another sound rose. A second rumble, softer, more mournful. Not a warning, a call, a question. And the forest, once again, held its breath. Rain returned like it had never left. Thin sheets falling sideways, draping the trees in motionless curtains. It was the kind of spring rain that soaked through flannel and memory in the same breath. The kind that softened bark and buried scent, but made every sound count. Jonah trudged the last stretch of the trail, soaked to the knees, one boot squishing faintly with every step. His arms ached from holding them. The two little creatures bundled inside his jacket, their tiny bodies pressed to his ribs like they belonged there. He didn't even bother trying to explain it to himself. The cabin came into view through the mist like an old friend peeking through grief. The porch steps moaned as he climbed them. The taller one stirred against his shoulder, fingers twitching in the fabric of his coat. The smaller one barely moved, just breath, warm and faint against his collarbone. Inside, the fire was out, but the coals were still red. Jonah kneeled with a grunt, shifting them gently from his chest onto a folded blanket. His hands moved automatically, flannel off the peg, thick towel, shaking fingers around the matches, flint and wood. The room warmed fast. He built the fire high. They needed it. He peeled off his coat and draped it near the hearth. Steam began to rise. His own shirt clung to him like old regrets. The creatures huddled near the stone hearth, still trembling. But they weren't trying to flee. Their eyes followed him, wide, unblinking, dark as creek water in shadow. Not scared exactly, just waiting. He didn't say anything. What could he possibly say? A beat passed, then another. The taller one, the one who had helped him in the river, let out a soft, irregular chirp. Then again, a third time. A pattern. Jonah turned. The sound repeated, slower. 4 ticks in rhythm. His breath caught. It was his mantel clock. The old one. The beat-up grandfather with the walnut casing and the faint chip in the face. It made that pattern every hour. That exact rhythm. The creature tilted its head, then did it again. Tick, tick, tock, tick. A perfect mimic. Jonah blinked. You little smart. The words died before they finished forming. He crouched, slow, careful, palmed a folded flannel shirt from the shelf and moved closer. No sudden moves. He knelt in front of them like he was learning how to be human again. They let him. He gently wrapped the smaller one. Its eyes half-lidded, but it leaned into the warmth. Its breathing steady now, steady like the seconds that ran through his workshop day after day. The cabin's quiet began to settle. Fire snapping, rain ticking against the roof. The kind of quiet he used to chase. The kind Evelyn once called holy, until the windows shook. Not from wind. Jonah froze. It was faint. A single thump, not a knock, not a strike. Just wait. Something heavy brushing past the outside wall. He stepped back from the fireplace, stared at the door. No sound followed. But the air had changed. He moved toward the kitchen, slowly. Each step careful. The floor creaked once beneath him, loud as a shout in the hush. He reached the counter, grabbed the flashlight he kept taped under the drawer, clicked it once. Beam cut through the misted window. Outside, nothing. Just fog and trees and rain. He waited, long enough for the silence to start crawling again. Then a shadow passed across the porch. A full body's length. It moved like it didn't care who heard it, like weight had nothing to prove. Jonah gripped the edge of the counter. He didn't breathe. Inside the cabin, the two little ones pressed closer to each other. They didn't make a sound. The taller one glanced at the door. Then at Jonah. He knew. Something else was here. He stepped to the side window and looked out, just enough to see the porch steps. Nothing moved. Then came a sound, a scrape, soft, careful, and then stillness. He turned slowly toward the front door, and there, resting against the wood, was a hand. Not a fist, not a knock, just placed there, massive, the size of a dinner plate, covered in coarse dark hair, glistening from rain, fingers long, tipped in nails dulled from years of forest wear. The hand didn't push, didn't try the latch. It just stayed, as if waiting. Jonah didn't speak. He couldn't. His mouth was dry. Every instinct told him to lock the door, barricade it. But something deeper, something older, told him not to. The hand shifted once, then pulled back. A long pause. Then from beyond the trees came a low, broken sound. Not a roar, not a growl. It cracked somewhere between a moan and a call. Something ancient and full of ache. Something that had lost something. The smaller creature in the blanket whimpered softly. Jonah turned to them. Both of them were staring at the door. Then, almost in sync, they reached for him. Tiny hands, warm, shaking, gripping the hem of his shirt. He dropped to his knees, instinctively drawing them close. He didn't know if he was protecting them or if they were protecting him. Another cry sounded. Closer this time. More urgent, like a mother calling through storm and fog. Jonah's heart thudded once, twice, then steadied. He stood, holding the taller one's hand, walked toward the door. He didn't open it. He just placed his palm flat against the wood, where the giant hand had been. The wood was still warm. He kept his hand there, breathing, listening. Then slowly, from the other side, there came a breath, soft, heavy, matching his own, and then it was gone. No steps, no retreating thunder, just absence. He stepped back. No part of him knew what to do next. The room seemed quieter than it had ever been. Even the rain outside was gentle again, like the forest itself had just exhaled. He turned toward the fireplace. The smaller one was asleep now, wrapped in red flannel, curled like a kitten on the rug. The taller one watched him. Then it blinked, once, slow. It wasn't fear in its eyes. It was something else. Recognition. He sat beside them, not speaking, listening to the fire crackle. Something had reached across the distance tonight. Not a beast, not a ghost, but a parent. A voice had cried for its young in a way that felt familiar. He stayed there until the flames lowered and the warmth began to thin. When he finally rose to tend the fire, he noticed something outside the window. At the edge of the porch, nestled in the corner, sat a small bundle. He opened the door. Rain misted his face. He stepped forward. Laid neatly in a coil of wet cedar bark and soft leaves were wild berries, red and golden. And next to them, fresh shoots of young pine, snapped carefully at the base. No footprints, no scent, just an offering, a message. He picked it up, careful not to disturb the shape. When he stepped back inside, the cabin felt smaller somehow, not crowded, held. He closed the door and locked it out of habit, then turned to the hearth again. The fire danced shadows against the wall. The clock ticked once, then again. But the rhythm felt different now, not lonely. He set the bundle beside the fire, pulled a blanket over his shoulders, sat down between the two little beings whose names he didn't know, but whose lives he had already stepped into. The rain didn't let up, but something in the forest had, and whatever it was, it hadn't come to take them back by force. It had come to ask, and to thank. The chime above the shop door hadn't rung in over 2 days. It caught Jonah off guard. A soft metallic ding, more memory than sound. He looked up from the bent escapement spring in his hand, eyes narrowing behind smudged glasses. Outside, the wind carried that late spring warmth that felt borrowed from July. But inside his workshop it still smelled of brass filings and lemon oil, and the way time used to pass slower. She stepped inside like she'd been there before. Not bold, not shy, just sure-footed. Tall boots, Ranger green pants still damp around the hem. Her jacket half zipped, collar turned up, dark braid pulled through the back of a cap. Her eyes scanned the place like she was trying to place something half-remembered. He stood. She nodded once. "You Jonah Mercer?" "Used to be," he said. The line came out gruffer than he meant it. She walked to the counter and pulled something from her coat pocket, wrapped in a handkerchief, folded 3 times. "I heard you fix old things," she said. He didn't answer, just untied the cloth slowly. Inside, an antique pocket watch rested. The glass cracked clean through, minute hand missing, but the casing was beautiful. Worn brass. Faint initials near the hinge. "Was my dad's," she said. "Stopped ticking the day he died. Been that way since." Jonah touched the dial gently, thumb brushing the edge. He looked up. "You sure you want it working again?" Her mouth pulled tight, eyes steady. "I'm not trying to hear it tick. I'm trying to know it could again." He nodded. She offered her hand. "Lena McCoy. I'm a ranger up north, Wildlife Division." He shook it. Warm palm, strong fingers. He motioned toward the bench. "You want to wait or—" "I've got time," she said. He slid the watch open, set his loop, and got to work. She paced the room, slow, reading titles of books stacked on a warped shelf. Noticed the cabinet with its rows of small drawers, screws, springs, hands, bezels. She paused at the photo on the wall. A woman in a wool coat, laughing, one hand holding a steaming mug, the other resting on Jonah's shoulder. Cabin porch, early snow. "She's beautiful," Lena said quietly. "She was," Jonah replied without looking up. "Still is when it gets quiet enough." They sat with the silence for a beat too long. "My dad was like that," Lena said. "Still hear him in the wind sometimes, especially when it moves weird through the trees." Jonah glanced at her. Something in her voice, not wistful. Something else. She caught his look. "You ever hear something out there that didn't fit?" she asked. "Something that made the woods feel like they weren't entirely yours?" He didn't answer. "I was 9 the first time," she continued. "Got separated from a trail group during a storm. I remember freezing behind a dead log, crying so hard I didn't notice the lightning anymore. Then I heard it." "What?" "Something call back. Not words, just a sound. Deep. Felt it in my ribs. It didn't scare me. It calmed me. And when the search team found me, I was asleep. Dry, covered in spruce branches someone had tucked around me." Jonah's hand paused on the watch gears. His breath caught. "I didn't tell anyone. Thought they'd say I hit my head." He cleared his throat. "And now?" "Now," she said. "I hear it again sometimes, and last night I saw a footprint near my patrol cabin, 3 miles from here." She pulled her phone from her pocket and opened a photo. Mud, pine needles. A clear print, wide, deep, 5 toes. Bigger than any bear. Much bigger. "I followed it. It went east, toward the ridge." Jonah set down his tools. "You've seen something," she said. He looked at her, slow. "I don't know what I've seen." "Then maybe you'll show me where you haven't." Something about her steadiness unnerved him. He hesitated, then nodded. The walk back to the cabin took them through a grove of birch that had just started to leaf. Pale light dappled the trail. Lena moved like someone who knew what every broken branch meant, but her silence said she was watching more than walking. Jonah said little, just led. When they reached the clearing, she stopped. "This it?" He nodded. The cabin stood like it always had, smoke curling faint from the chimney. The porch quiet, the woods behind it holding their breath. Inside, nothing moved. The blanket was gone, no sound. Lena stepped in behind him, eyes scanning every corner. He moved quickly, checking behind the armchair, under the table. Nothing. She watched him. "Were they children?" she asked. He froze. She stepped forward. "I didn't come here to prove you wrong. I came to find what I lost." He turned to her slowly. Then the clock on the mantel ticked. Once. Twice. It hadn't worked in 20 years. She turned to look. Then another sound, lower, from beneath the floorboards. A faint hum, then a whisper, mimicked perfectly. Tick, tick, pause, tick. Lena crouched, eyes scanning the shadows. Her hand moved toward her pocket, but she stopped herself. Something small shifted under the old side table. Then an eye. Round, wide, intelligent. She exhaled. "It's okay." No sudden move, just a whisper. Her hand rested gently on the floor. The creature stepped forward, half in shadow, half in light. Soaked fur, but clean. No wounds. It blinked, mimicked the tick again. Then slowly, it reached out and touched her fingertip. Her breath caught, but she didn't flinch. "It's a child," she whispered. "It's like us." The other emerged from behind the old blanket chest. Smaller, still trembling. It pressed against its sibling. Lena stayed still, then turned to Jonah. "You weren't crazy. You were kind." She looked back at the two. "And they know it." He nodded slowly. Then came a knock. Not at the door, but a rustle just outside the porch. Then silence. Lena stood, hand to her chest. She stepped softly to the window, parted the curtain. On the step, a bundle. Small leaves, a pile of red berries, some pine bark, arranged like a gift. No prints, no sound. "They're watching," she whispered. She turned to Jonah. "They know you saved them." She said it like a truth that didn't need proving. He stared at the gift, then at the little ones. For the first time, he didn't feel alone in the cabin. Not haunted, witnessed, and that changed everything. The rain had passed, but the forest still carried its breath. Damp earth, heavy boughs. That clean, electric stillness after water leaves its signature on everything. Jonah stood at the edge of the clearing, boots sinking into soft needles, his coat unbuttoned. The little one was tugging his hand. Not hard, just enough. Its other hand clutched a small stone, flat, round, river-worn, as if it meant something. It paused every few steps, glancing back to make sure he was still coming. Then it'd keep going. And he followed. Past the creek, past the old cedar stump, up the narrow slope where the birches thinned into towering ponderosas. He hadn't walked this deep in years, but the trees knew. They watched him pass like old neighbors, too polite to ask questions. Jonah glanced over his shoulder once. Lena was following, 10 feet behind, quiet, watchful. She hadn't said much since that morning. Just packed a canteen and her father's old watch. It was ticking now, steady as her heartbeat. The sky overhead dimmed as they moved deeper. The sun was still up somewhere, but here under the canopy, time slipped sideways. The air felt older. Pine resin, moss, the hush of a place not meant for boots. Then the little one stopped. It turned, stared at Jonah, then at Lena. Its dark eyes blinked twice, then it pointed. Ahead, the forest opened like a held breath. A narrow clearing lit by soft light filtering through broken branches. Grass flattened in wide, deliberate patterns. And standing there, still, colossal, were two shapes. Jonah froze. Lena sucked in a sharp breath. One stood taller than any man Jonah had ever known. Shoulders broad as a door frame. Fur dark like river mud, matted with leaves and streaks of silver. The other, shorter by a head, stood beside it, posture fluid but firm, hair falling in strands over a powerful chest. The mother, the father, they didn't move. Then, without sound, the little ones ran forward. No hesitation. They crossed the gap like kids late for dinner. One reached the mother first, throwing itself into her side. The other clung to the father's leg, small fingers curled into wet fur. Jonah watched as the mother bent down, hands trembling. She inspected their faces, their limbs, her breath catching with every brush of their hair. Then she held them both, her arms encircling their fragile bodies like a cathedral being rebuilt. And the father, he never took his eyes off Jonah. Not threatening, not defensive, just locked in. Jonah stepped forward. 1 step. 2. The mother rose slowly, her movements deliberate, not fearful. Then she did something no bear, no ape, no wild thing would do. She stepped toward him. Her chest rose with a slow inhale. Her gaze dropped, and she bent, knees creaking like old branches, until she was eye level with him. Her eyes shimmered with something primal and human all at once. Then she reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. Her palm was warm, trembling, not out of fear, out of gratitude. He didn't breathe. Lena stepped closer now, just enough to see everything. The father shifted then, and Jonah's eyes caught something he hadn't seen before. A jagged wound across his calf, deep, swollen, crusted with old blood and dirt. Jonah took a slow step toward him, careful not to startle. The creature stood his ground. The gash wasn't fresh, but it was infected and ugly. Jonah turned to Lena. Her voice dropped low. "That's a spring clamp wound, not a hunter's trap. Too wide. That's industrial." "Illegal mining?" he asked. "Has to be. These traps aren't for deer." Jonah looked again at the wound. The leg trembled slightly under the weight, but the creature didn't flinch, just stood tall. Then, as if sensing Jonah's gaze, the creature dropped to one knee, a slow, deliberate movement, and his arms opened slightly, allowing the little ones to press against his side. A family, no different from any other, and in that clearing, under the whisper of high pine boughs, Jonah saw them not as myth, not as beasts, but as something sacred. A father injured, a mother guarding, two children safe again. Lena moved closer. Her eyes scanned the tree line. She crouched, ran a hand over the earth. Then she stopped. Shoe prints, not boot tracks, not old. "They've been here," she whispered, "and they're close." Jonah stepped beside her. The prints were clear, a deep tread, recent, still moist at the edges. Lena looked up at the tree trunks. Scratches on bark, not from claws, from metal. She turned slowly, her voice quiet. "They're tracking them." Jonah looked at the family again. The mother was watching them now, not in fear, in awareness. She knew what Lena had just seen, and she didn't panic. She just slowly reached behind her back and pulled something from the folds of fur across her chest. She walked toward Jonah again. This time she extended both hands. Between them was a small object, woven from thin strands of dried grass. Circular, knotted in a pattern he didn't recognize. She held it out. He didn't take it right away. Then she lowered her arms and carefully looped it over his wrist. A symbol, a bond, not decoration. He looked at her, searching for words that wouldn't come. Then the wind changed, sharp, dry. Something distant cracked, like brush being stepped on. Lena turned, alert. That wasn't an animal. The father rose, his posture shifting. He glanced down at the little ones and made a low, breathy sound. Not harsh, but commanding. The mother leaned in, touched the children's heads, then gently ushered them behind a fallen log. Jonah stepped back. Then he felt something press into his hand. He looked down. The smallest one had returned. It placed the stone from earlier into his palm. Just placed it. No words, no gesture. But the meaning was clear. "Hold on. Don't forget." Then the little one darted back to its mother. Jonah clenched the stone without meaning to. Lena's voice broke the stillness. "We should go." He nodded. The forest felt narrower on the way out, the trees leaning in closer, watching, not menacing, just aware. Jonah didn't speak until they reached the trailhead. Then finally he said, "We saw a family." Lena nodded. "And someone's trying to break it." She turned to him, her face hardening with something deeper than fear. "They're not just living out there, Jonah. They're hiding." The light through the branches shifted, and somewhere deeper in the woods, another sound echoed. Not close, not far, but purposeful. And not alone. Toby Rourke didn't believe in monsters, but he wanted to. 16 is an age where you don't say things out loud like "I'm lonely" or "I don't know where I fit anymore." You just go looking for something that doesn't make fun of you for not knowing what to be. For Toby, that meant the forest. For most kids in Briar Glen, it meant trucks, girls, or whiskey stolen from the back of someone's barn. He sat cross-legged behind the dumpster outside Jack's bar, elbows on his knees, listening through the cracked cinder-block wall. The old men were louder tonight. The kind of drunk that turns truth into story and fear into bragging. "I'm tellin' you," one slurred. "That thing weren't no bear. Stood upright, big, silent, stared me down right out by the old wash trail. Swear on my brother's grave." "Yeah?" Another chuckled. "And did it ask for your wallet too?" Laughter, ice clinking in cheap glasses. But one voice cut through, quieter, rougher. "Wasn't no joke. Old Stanton's dogs won't go near the creek no more. Something's back in those hills. Ain't natural." Toby leaned in, breath still. Another voice joined in. This one sharper. "You know what's up that way? The Ridgeback Mine. Place is a gold vein graveyard. Haven't been worked in years because of all the caving. But the stories say something guards it. Always has." "Guardin' gold?" the first man laughed. "Guardin' something," the sharper voice answered. "And I don't plan on finding out the hard way." That was all Toby needed. He waited until they stumbled out the back, lighting cigarettes and arguing about baseball. Then he slipped into the dark, back toward the trailhead behind the hardware store. The mine wasn't on any maps you'd buy, but he'd seen the old boundary markers last winter while hiking with his uncle. It was real, and something in him wanted it to be more than real. He waited until morning to make his move. Said he was heading to the lake to fish alone. Nobody asked questions. Slung a small pack over his shoulder, canteen, flashlight, pocket knife, sandwich wrapped in wax paper, his grandpa's compass. The trail climbed fast. By noon, the air grew heavier. Sunlight sifted through high branches and beams, thick as syrup. He cut left off the ridge trail, scrambled over a mossy slope, and there, hidden behind a curtain of ferns and stone, was the mouth of the forgotten mine. It breathed cool air. Toby stepped inside. The air changed. Stale. Wet. Like the inside of a closed tomb. He clicked on his flashlight and swept the beam along the walls. The mine was wider than he expected. Still solid. Marks on the timber braces showed where tools once struck, decades ago. He walked slowly, boots crunching gravel. Then he saw it. A patch of fur snagged on a jagged edge of rusted metal. Brown, coarse, long. He reached out, ran his fingers along it. Not bare. And then, on the stone wall ahead, he froze. Scratched into the rock, faint, wide lines. Was something that looked like a drawing, not carved with tools, scraped with purpose. A circle, then 4 smaller circles around it, like a constellation or a family. His heart pounded. It was deliberate, not random. Behind him, the faint sound of voices echoed. Toby killed his light and dropped low behind a pile of broken boards. He waited. Boots. 3 of them, adults, men, talking low, but not careful. "You said it comes through here?" one asked. "Tracks right at the entrance," another replied. "Fresh. Wet fur on the edge. I'm telling you, this is where they're hiding." A metallic rattle, then a snap. Toby peeked from behind the woodpile. They were setting traps. Big ones, steel jaws wide enough to crush a grown deer's leg. "Once we get one," the tallest said, "we sell it, or prove it. Either way, we're not going to be poor no more." The others nodded. Toby's stomach twisted. This wasn't a ghost hunt. This wasn't some kid's adventure. These men were hunting something that didn't want to be found. Or hurt. They moved deeper into the mine. Toby crept the opposite way, heart pounding in his throat. He ducked around a collapsed support beam and sprinted toward the light. He emerged blinking into the trees, the world suddenly too bright, too loud. He didn't stop running until he reached the edge of the trail that led toward Jonah's cabin. And then he saw her, Lena, kneeling by a patch of disturbed leaves. Her ranger uniform was smeared with dirt, a wire cutter in her hand. "Toby," she asked, standing quickly. He bent over, catching his breath. They're up there. 3 guys, setting traps. Huge ones. They think they're gonna catch it, sell it." Lena's jaw clenched. Toby looked past her. One of the little ones was standing beside the porch, watching them, not hiding anymore, just standing. "You know, Toby said softly. Don't you? Lena didn't answer. Toby stepped forward. You've seen it. You've seen them. Lena nodded. And so have you. I thought I just wanted to know they were real, he said. But now I wish they weren't. Because people ruin things. She looked at him, and for the first time, Toby didn't feel like a kid anymore. Well, we have to stop them, he said. Lena's eyes narrowed. Then we better move fast. That night the wind picked up. Jonah stood at the edge of the porch, watching the treetops sway. He didn't say anything when Toby and Lena returned. Just opened the door and let them in. Inside, the fire was low. The cabin felt tight, tense. They're gonna come back, Toby said. With more traps, maybe guns. Lena nodded. We need to move them, tonight. Jonah looked at the two little ones, now curled up on the hearth rug. It's not just them, he said. There's more. Lena turned. Where? They led me to their parents, Jonah said. They're real, a family, and they're hurt. Toby looked at them both. We need a plan, he said. No one spoke for a moment. Then the fire cracked, and Jonah said, I'll draw them away. Lena blinked. What? You get the little ones out through the valley. I'll lead the men somewhere else, somewhere they won't find what they're looking for. Toby stood. I'll go with Lena. Jonah looked at him. It'll be dangerous. I know, he said, but they saved me, even if they don't know it. Outside, the wind howled. Somewhere in the dark, a branch snapped. But it wasn't the trees that were breaking. It was the line between what people feared and what they needed to protect. And come morning, that line would be crossed for good. The fog had teeth that night. Not the kind you saw from the window and called pretty or peaceful, but a thick, wet thing that crawled across the pines and stayed low to the earth like it was waiting to catch someone off balance. It made the beams of the flashlights cut short, like lies told in half-light. The air was heavy with the smell of metal, sweat, and old moss. And somewhere in the distance, a coyote barked once, sharp, anxious, and then nothing. The men moved like they'd done this before. 3 of them. No names spoken, just nods. Headlamps clicked on in unison, shoulders hunched under old army jackets. The way they carried their rifles said they weren't there for warning shots. Boots sank into wet pine needles. The ground drank their footsteps. They weren't hunting for proof anymore. They were hunting for ownership. Deeper into the woods, Jonah crouched behind a patch of rhododendron, heart thumping against his ribs like a second pulse. He could feel the presence of them now. Not the men, the others. The ones who'd been watching the valley long before any human built fences or carved their names into trees. The little ones were already gone. Lena had taken them, slipping through the back trail hours before, guided by Toby and the faint light of a lantern wrapped in cloth to hide its glow. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. Jonah had told her he'd slow the hunters down. He hadn't told her how. Now, as the beams of light cut just a few yards away, he slipped a stone down the trail. Let it bounce once, sharp, dry, just enough to catch their ears. The sound echoed wrong in the fog. Bounced too close, too quick. There, one of them hissed. Jonah moved left, brushing low against the mossy earth. His knees groaned, his lungs burned, but he kept going. A shot rang out, loud, panicked, too high. The crack split the silence and scattered the birds from their sleep. A flurry of wings above trees that hadn't moved all night. Damn it, Carl, another voice growled. You're gonna scare it off. You think it don't already know we're here? Carl snapped back. Jonah kept moving. The trail dipped now, descending into a narrow cut between 2 ridges. A place Lena once called the Whisper Bend, where the fog liked to pool and time felt slower. He took the long way through it, not hurrying, not rushing, just enough distance to stay ahead. Back on the other side of the valley, Lena pressed a hand to Toby's shoulder, pausing them both behind a fallen log. The little ones huddled close under her coat, their bodies barely making sound. She listened hard, eyes scanning the dark. They're still in the trees, she whispered. "We need to cut west." Toby nodded, breath shaky. "Will Jonah be okay?" he asked. Lena looked toward the fog. "I don't know," she said. "But he knew what he was doing." They moved fast, cutting through the low growth, their boots silent in the damp underbrush. The taller of the two little ones kept pace now, not stumbling, its hand clenched tight in Toby's. The younger followed, eyes wide, head turning with every owl cry. Then behind them, another shot. Lena dropped low. Toby froze. That one wasn't panicked. That was aimed. Jonah ducked behind a pine, heart racing. Bark splintered above his head. The bullet had missed by inches. He gritted his teeth and ran. Not fast, just enough to draw. He broke into a small clearing and turned, letting the flashlight beam glance off his jacket. He let them see him, and they saw just enough. "There!" one of them shouted. 2 pairs of boots crashed through the ferns. Jonah ran again, straight toward the ridge's edge. He could hear them cursing, slipping on the wet stones. The ground dropped fast. He hit the slope and slid, boots scrabbling for purchase. Stones clattered down. His hips slammed into a root. He caught himself barely, grabbing onto a thick branch. He dangled for a moment, chest heaving, then climbed back onto the slope. The men didn't follow. Above, he heard one mutter, "Let the bastard fall if he wants." Jonah stood at the bottom of the ridge now, alone in a wash of moonlight and mist. He turned back toward the lower valley and started walking. His left leg was throbbing, probably bruised, but he didn't care. He had done what he came to do. Up the slope, the men cursed again and began circling toward the western trail. Back on the far end of the valley, the woods opened slightly into a low, quiet clearing. Lena led them there, breath coming harder now. The little ones didn't speak, but they were moving better, no longer stumbling. The taller one pointed toward the trees, made a soft sound in its throat. Lena turned, and from the mist, he came, massive. The father, limping, still bearing the wound that hadn't fully healed, but upright and moving. He came from the trees with weight in his steps and fire in his eyes, stopping only when he reached the edge of the clearing. The children saw him and broke into a run. Arms wide, sounds spilling from their throats like song and sob tangled together. He knelt, arms open, and they collided into him, their small hands clutching fur and bone. Lena stepped back. Toby froze, eyes wide. And then came the second form, the mother, silent as wind, stepping through the veil of trees, her eyes locked on Lena, not in warning, in recognition. She approached slowly, then turned her gaze toward the forest behind them. She had heard it too. The men. Lena looked around the clearing. "We can't stay here. We need to—" She stopped. The father was moving. He stood, gently lifting the children behind him. Then he turned toward the trees and walked, limping, but sure, toward the danger. "No," Lena whispered. No, not alone." But he didn't stop. And Jonah, somewhere along the North Trail, heard it first. A howl of rage, of protection, of something wild and human all at once. Then shouting, then gunfire. He turned and ran, fast as his legs could go. Lena and Toby followed the sound, dodging branches, feet stumbling on moss and root. The mother followed close behind, silent shadow, eyes burning. They reached the edge of the tree line just in time to see one of the hunters, Carl, on the ground. His gun snapped in half, blood on his face, screaming. The others were already running, and in the mist, half hidden by trees and moonlight, the father stood, shoulders heaving, arms down, not victorious. Hurt. Again. He staggered once. Jonah reached him. The old man dropped to his knees, caught the creature before he fell, hands gripping thick fur, feeling the tremble underneath. The eyes met, and in them, not fear, just exhaustion, a kind of peace, a kind of thanks. Lena dropped beside them, her breath coming fast. "He saved them," she whispered. "No," Jonah said. "He loved them. That's what saved them." The creature stirred, its breath shallow. Then, a final gift. A hand reached toward Jonah's chest. A finger touched the old woven band still tied at his wrist. A circle, grass, memory. And then the valley went still, not in silence, but in honor, and the forest, just for a moment, exhaled. The leaves had started to change. Not all at once, not dramatically. Just a hint of copper at the edges. A faint rust in the veins of the aspens, like the trees were quietly admitting that summer was leaving and there was no point pretending otherwise. Jonah stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, staring out past the clearing where the ferns were beginning to curl inward for the season. The forest didn't speak like it used to. It had grown quieter, not with menace, but with distance. A respectful hush. Like something that had come close had now stepped back. He hadn't seen them in days. He'd walked the trails, the familiar ones, and the ones they'd once led him down. Left offerings, small ones, stacked stones, strips of cloth knotted in quiet gratitude. He hadn't heard a reply, not in calls, not in whispers, not even in the strange mimicry he had come to feel comforted by. Still, every morning he checked the step, and that morning, there it was, a bundle wrapped in dried birch bark, bound in a strip of pine root, lay just beyond the doormat, like it had been placed by hands that didn't want to wake the house. He bent down slowly, knees stiff, and picked it up. The bark crackled faintly. Inside, a bundle of dried herbs, still fragrant, pine tips, sweet grass, something that smelled like wild mint and memory. And beneath it, tucked between two cedar sprigs, was a small piece of carved wood. He turned it over in his hand, roughly the size of his palm, unfinished. But not random. There were curves, intent, the first shaping of a face, a woman's. The mouth not quite formed, but the eyes, they were there. And the shape of the cheekbones. It hit him before his mind caught up. It was her, Evelyn. Not a perfect likeness, not a portrait, but unmistakably her. The soft slope of her jaw, the laugh lines beneath the eyes, the tilt of the head, not symmetrical, not staged, natural, like someone had seen her, really seen her, like someone had been watching long before the rescue, before the river, before the loss. Jonah sat down hard on the top step. The air thickened in his throat. The carving rested in his lap. His hands didn't move for a long time. He didn't know how long he sat there. Long enough for the light to shift, for the wind to pick up just enough to rattle the tin over the window. When he finally stood, he brought the carving inside, placed it on the mantel beside the broken watch he still hadn't repaired. He lit the fire early, even though the air wasn't cold yet, and then he waited. That night, the knocking didn't come at the door. It came from the edge of the woods. 3 soft sounds, not fists, not branches. Contact, deliberate. Jonah stepped outside slowly. He didn't bring a lantern. He didn't call out. They stepped forward one by one, as if pulled from the shadows by memory. The children first, not running, walking, taller than before. Their movements more assured. Their eyes still wide, still deep, but not frightened. They approached the porch and stopped just at the bottom step. One reached into a pouch across its chest and produced something clenched tight. A small stone, flat, smooth. It matched the first one they'd given him, the one still on his nightstand. He took it. The little one pressed it into his hand without looking away. Behind them, the mother appeared. No sound, no warning. She stood tall, her shoulders squared. And behind her, the father. He was still limping, but less. His gait had returned, his eyes no longer dulled by pain. Jonah stepped off the porch. He met them in the clearing. The wind slowed. The stars came out one by one, blinking through the branches. No words were exchanged, but something passed between them. Recognition, continuance. The mother stepped forward first. She held something in both hands, a shard of old metal, bent, scarred with rust. Jonah's breath caught. It was part of the trap, the one that had crushed the father's leg, the one Lena had described. Industrial, ugly, human. The mother lowered it gently to the earth between them. She looked at him, not with blame, but with something deeper, forgiveness, and something else, a warning. Not all wounds stay visible. Jonah knelt. His knees popped. He placed his palm next to the metal, not touching it, just acknowledging it. Then, in silence, the father stepped forward. He reached out. His hand, massive, wrapped in layers of wild fur and time, reached toward Jonah's chest. Not in threat, in gesture. His fingertips touched the woven ring of grass still tied at Jonah's wrist, the one the mother had given him weeks ago. It was brittle now, faded. The father touched it once, then pressed his own forehead gently, deliberately, to Jonah's. Just for a second, then pulled away. A breath passed. Jonah didn't move. Didn't need to. He had been seen. Accepted. Then the creatures turned. Not rushed, just turning with the ease of something complete. The children paused, glanced back once, then followed. They slipped into the trees like rain dissolving into soil. By morning, the carving on the mantel caught the sunrise through the window. Jonah sat beside it, sipping coffee gone cold. He didn't touch it. Not yet. There were no footprints outside, no sign of passage. But when he stepped out onto the porch to get wood, something else lay there. A small bundle of fresh leaves, still wet with dew, as if they'd been picked just minutes before. He didn't know if they'd come back again. He didn't need to. Sometimes presence wasn't about staying. It was about returning what had once been taken, even if that was a sense of self. And as the wind stirred the branches, brushing against the sides of the cabin like a hand along memory, Jonah knew one thing. He was no longer waiting to be found. He had already been chosen. The first snow came without warning, not in blizzards, not in noise. It fell like memory, soft, sudden, already melting at the edges. Just enough to change the color of the roof. Just enough to make the steps slippery when you weren't paying attention. The kind of snow that doesn't announce winter, but lets the forest know it's almost time to go quiet. Jonah stood by the window with a coffee gone cold in his hand, watching the flakes melt against the window pane. They dissolved on contact, but still, they kept coming. A thin white veil forming on the wood pile, on the grass, on the old rocking chair he hadn't sat in since August. It made everything look gentler than it was. Even time. Inside the cabin, the clocks ticked like they always did, but more softly now, as if aware of something sacred approaching. The fire hadn't been lit yet. The air in the cabin wasn't cold, just still. And in that stillness, Jonah felt the way you feel before company arrives. Not anxiety, not fear, just a quiet certainty that something will appear when it's ready. The little carving of Evelyn still sat on the mantel, framed by pine cones and the circle of grass from his wrist that he'd placed beside it. Dried now, golden and delicate. He hadn't touched either since that day, but they'd changed the feel of the room. As if she were in the house again, just in the other room. Or maybe in the walls. The cabin door creaked open with a groan he didn't bother fixing anymore. He stepped outside. The world was pale, but not dead. The kind of white that made every tree darker, every branch sharper. Snow clung to the lower boughs of the evergreens, not heavy enough to bend them. The air smelled of cedar smoke drifting in from somewhere he couldn't place. Not his own chimney. He heard the cry before he saw it. A short sound, almost a bleat. Not desperate, not frightened, just lost. Jonah moved toward it, slow and steady. His boots crunched faintly across the frost-laced moss. Past the chopping stump. Past the pile of unused traps he still hadn't buried. At the edge of the trees, barely visible through a veil of white breath and mist, stood a young fawn. Its legs trembled, body slick with new snow, ribs thin under its coat. It blinked at him once, head tilting, eyes huge and wet. Then it stepped forward, almost hopeful, and collapsed gently against the side of the porch. Jonah crouched. No wounds, just cold, just alone. He slid off his coat and wrapped it around the fawn, fingers gentle. Practiced. The animal shivered but didn't bolt. It settled under the canvas like it knew it had found a shelter. He didn't bring it inside. He built a small fire just beside the porch, fed it slow with dry bark and slivers of pine. The fawn stayed beside it, breathing deep, eyes half-lidded. Safe. Jonah didn't speak. Not to it. Not to the trees. But something heard. When he stepped back into the cabin to fetch more wood, he found it waiting. On the doormat. A bundle. Not a large one, but new. Wrapped in clean, wet leaves, tied in grass still green at the stem. A ring of pine needles curled around it like a nest. Inside, a piece of wood, carved. Not like the last one. This one was different. A trail. A winding path through trees. He traced it with his finger, recognizing the bend near the creek, the notch in the ridgeline. It led to a clearing, and in the center of that clearing, a circle. Raised. Etched in shallow grooves like sun rays or ripples in a still pond. An invitation. He didn't wait. He packed light, pulled on his boots, left a second blanket with the fawn, whispered something without sound, and then he followed. The trail was silent beneath his feet. Snow fell in a hush. Every step brought him deeper into that hush, as if sound had no use here anymore. By the time he reached the clearing, the clouds had thinned. Moonlight spilled through the trees like milk poured onto cold glass. And in that clearing, just where the carving had shone, was a ring of stones, no larger than a campfire circle, but older, marked with symbols he couldn't read, or maybe didn't need to. He stepped to the edge, looked around. No movement, no figures, but something was here. A vibration, low and deep, not sound, not touch. Something in between. He sat down in the snow, just at the edge of the ring, closed his eyes, and listened. The trees creaked faintly. Far off, something moved. A bird? A branch? Hard to say. But then came a sound that didn't belong to wind or forest. A call. Not loud, not close, but familiar. He opened his eyes, and through the trees, just on the other side of the ring, he saw a silhouette. Not standing, not moving, just watching. No malice, no fear, only presence. It lifted one arm, a hand, open palm. Jonah mirrored it. Neither of them stepped forward. They didn't have to. The air between them did the rest. Something passed in that space. Not words, not memories. Just truth. That this moment had been building for a long time. That kindness was never wasted. That sometimes you don't need answers. Just acknowledgement. The figure stepped back, slowly, melted into the white. Gone. Jonah stayed until the fire in his belly had cooled into something warm. Not burning. When he stood, he didn't feel older. He felt finished and full. He walked back under a sky full of stars. No fear. No hurry. The snow fell quietly behind him, covering his footprints almost as fast as he made them. The cabin lights glowed like a heartbeat across the valley. Inside, the fawn was gone. The blanket left behind, damp, folded like a thank you. He didn't question it. Not anymore. He sat by the hearth, hands wrapped around a mug of something warm, and all the clocks in the house ticked in unison. 1 moment, 2, then stopped. Together, not broken. Just quiet, as if time itself had chosen to kneel. He closed his eyes and smiled. There are stories that live in books, and there are stories that live in the trees. Some are told around dinner tables or under warm blankets, and some never need to be spoken at all, because the forest already knows them. This was one of those stories. A quiet tale about how kindness can move through silence, how love can speak without words, and how the softest choices can echo longer than the loudest ones. It was never about what we see, but about what we're willing to see, about what happens when we stop demanding proof and start offering presence. Sometimes, in a world so loud and rushed, it's easy to forget that the gentlest moments are often the most powerful, that reaching out doesn't require a language, that trust can be built not with declarations, but with small acts. A shared fire, a carved gift, a hand placed softly on another's shoulder. And maybe that's the heart of it. That connection doesn't always look the way we expect. That family isn't always made of the same skin, the same stories, or even the same world. That protection doesn't always come from the strong. Sometimes it comes from the ones who've been broken, who've lost, who've learned how to listen. We live in a world where legends are often dismissed, where truth is measured in evidence and noise. But some truths don't want to be caught. They want to be witnessed. They want to be respected. They want to be earned. There's something deeply human about that, because maybe we all have something wild inside us. Something that hides when it's hunted, but steps forward when it's seen. Something ancient that still believes in reciprocity, in giving back what was given, in remembering the hand that fed us, the voice that didn't yell, the eyes that didn't judge, and in that quiet space where two worlds meet, not in confrontation, but in recognition, something sacred happens. Not a spectacle, not a miracle, just a moment. A moment that says, I see you. A moment that says, we don't have to be the same to understand each other. A moment that says, the line between myth and memory is thinner than we think. So if you ever find yourself walking alone through a foggy clearing, and the birds go quiet, and the wind feels like it's holding its breath, maybe it's not emptiness you're feeling. Maybe it's the presence of something ancient watching gently from the tree line. Maybe it's a reminder that kindness leaves a trail, that it's never lost, and that sometimes the forest remembers. Thank you for joining us for this story, one woven from silence, respect, and a belief in something greater than what we can see. We'd love to know what you felt along the way. Have you ever had a moment that changed how you see the world? Do you believe there are things out there still choosing to remain unseen, not out of fear, but out of grace? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. We read everyone, and if this story found a place in your heart, we invite you to subscribe, follow, and stay with us. There are more stories to come. Stories whispered through the pines. Stories you can feel long after they end. Because sometimes, the quietest stories are the ones that stay with us the longest.